All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Mattson, and I am your host. In this episode, we have a panel here of Timber Harward, Joshua Nelson, and Skylar Sorensen that I've invited on to this, I think, very important episode. Timber, Joshua, and Skylar, can you one by one in that order just give us a brief breakdown of what you do and why you think you're on the show?
So my name is Timber Harward. I run a support ministry up here in Rexburg, Idaho called Beacon Ministry for Same-Sex Attracted Latter-day Saints. I'm also a current board member with North Star, although I'm not speaking in that capacity, just a full clarification. And I've been involved in ministry to same-sex attracted Latter-day Saints for about 6 years now, 7 years. So
okay, great.
Yeah.
Yep, my name is Joshua Nelson. So what I do is I essentially started a movement called Be Unique Org. I did it with Skylar, so he's in a lot of the videos. There's also Preston and James, and we're looking to get more videos at some point as well. But essentially what it is we're looking back at talks by President Kimball. So that's back in 1975. When President Oaks was the president of the church, of BYU. And so essentially what happened is he just used the word unique 15 times throughout that talk. And so we thought, what is the best way to try and remind people of what President Kimball essentially says, that BYU can only be an educational Mount Everest to the degree that it embraces its uniqueness or something to that effect. So that's the only way that BYU can be like this great university that like tons of tithing goes into, and just what the vision and mission of BYU should be, which is to go forth and serve. So essentially we just took that unique phrase and we just combined it with BYU and put it together, got Be Unique. So we're just a movement trying to remind the faculty and staff at BYU and all the students and anyone affiliated really with BYU that BYU needs to be a unique university. And the Worthen even just said that, a couple of days ago in his talk. He was talking about uniqueness. So it is still like a very relevant message for sure.
Right. Thank you. All right, Skylar.
Yeah, so I'm Skylar Sorensen. I started the podcast Sit Down with Sky that morphed to Sit Down with Sky and Preston, which is now morphing to Sit Down with Sky and Amanda when this Friday, actually, my wife is joining me as co-host. So I'm a gay member of the church, married to a woman in the temple in a mixed orientation marriage. I've recently wrote a book called Exclude Not Thyself, Thriving as a Gay Latter-day Saint. My attempt to give advice to gay Latter-day Saints on how to thrive in the church and keeping their covenants, as well as to other Latter-day Saints on how to support their LGBTQ or same-sex attracted Latter-day Saints without enabling a faith crisis. And I believe that's why I'm here. I don't know.
Okay, that is why you're here. That's exactly why you're here. Okay, so I want to start off with a couple of things. So I've got a few topics that I want to go over with you. One thing that is unique here, and it is somewhat unique, unfortunately, is that each of you is a covenant-keeping, faithful Latter-day Saint with the complete idea that, okay, I am hanging on to the iron rod and I'm going to the tree of life, right? And so what I see out there oftentimes when we're talking about gay Latter-day Saints, same-sex attraction, in the church even, is this, there's almost a different message that is offered to the LGBTQ individuals that has something more to do with, I don't know. I mean, something that has almost an alternative path sometimes to the covenant path. And oftentimes, we'll get into this a little later, almost a hope that that path changes to some degree, right? So tell me, let's start with you, Timber. Tell me a little bit more about your experience in the church and I don't know if you call yourself a gay Latter-day Saint or if you're same-sex attraction, but what is your experience in the church, good and bad, And why have you come to the point that you're at today?
So I prefer to identify as a son of God who happens to experience same-sex attraction. I know that's longer, but or SSA. But if you want to call me gay, that's fine too. So my experience is I lived an open gay lifestyle before I joined the church for a few years. And I joined the church when I was 22. I obviously still experience same-sex attraction. And honestly, coming into the church, I was pretty scared at first because I grew up in a part member family, never baptized. So I heard some of the negative things said and opinions towards homosexuals. And so I kind of closeted myself when I joined the church, and realized there weren't really good resources to help members of the church really know how to deal with this issue, like how to be a faithful member and reconcile this experience with faith in Jesus Christ. So long story short, after my mission, I decided I need to open up about my experience more and be a support to others to really help with that how. Because originally when I joined the church, there was just God loveth his children. I don't know if you know what that is. It's a blue little pamphlet. I don't even think they print it anymore, but it basically just says you're a son or daughter of God, and if you follow Jesus Christ, things are going to work out. And it's like, okay, well, how are they going to work out? And so that's really been my focus of my ministry, is helping others to see how it will work out. So,
yeah. Okay. And why, let me follow up with that though. Well, Skylar, let's go to you. What has your experience been in the church?
So yeah, I grew up in the church, an active member with a big family, all going to church down in southern Utah, and served a mission. Always had, when I pictured my future as a young person, I always pictured myself marrying a woman in the temple and having children of our own. That was kind of my vision of my future. And I'm really grateful for that, because obviously that vision has turned into a reality. And I really just look at it as I am pursuing the logical extension of my faith. I have a lot of people who offer me a lot of, excuse me, a lot of praise for doing what I'm doing. And I mean, I appreciate it, but at the same time feel like the path that I'm pursuing is really more selfish. Like, I remain committed to my covenants because I hate the feeling of having beliefs and not living up to them. So because I have a firm testimony, I've had experiences in my life that Jesus Christ is my savior, that this is his church, it's just a natural progression for me to pursue that course and get rid of there's that phrase, cognitive dissonance, and just to get rid of that feeling, because I have these beliefs and they're genuine and they're sincere. If I were to ever leave the church and pursue a different life or whatever, I mean, I'm sure I could find some amount of fulfillment, some amount of happiness, but I would always have that understanding that I could have done more, or I could have been more. And so that is where I am now, and very grateful and blessed to have my wife and our children, and just, yeah, I can't believe where I've gotten and how happy we are.
Okay, great. Josh, you're younger. Are you at BYU right now?
Not currently, no.
Not currently. Okay. What about your experience in the church?
Yeah, so mine has been pretty positive, I'd say, but especially when I was younger, though, there was a bit of some rough patches just growing up. So where the like same-sex attraction came from was actually just some traumatic experiences that happened with some of my friends and other things like that. So it wasn't like more of a natural thing. It was kind of like a happened thing. And so essentially throughout the years, I spent like going to church consistently and like trying to live the gospel right. And then like not, just going back and forth. And, I still struggle a little bit with some things, but I think things are a lot better than they were when I was 11. And so ever since then, I've been able to, I guess, just like use those experiences to try and help others that are experiencing same-sex attraction or do identify as gay. I have cousins that are gay, and I have a lot of close friends as well that are. And I just try and find ways to remind them of their eternal identity and what they really are, which is a son or daughter of God, and know that they are created for a reason. They can get married in the temple someday. And I just try and look at all the doctrines that the church has, and I try and absorb it as much as I can and just put it out there in the best words that I can. Because most of the time it will help, but it when it comes down to it, it's not me that helps them. It's the Spirit that teaches and can sometimes wake up their minds and remember that, each person has a spirit inside of them. You just have to unlock it. That's what I like to tell people. Like, it doesn't matter if they look like they're so far gone or so far into a gay lifestyle. You can always pull them back in, because that's what Jesus does, right? So I think for the church, like, there wasn't really anything bad per se, but I would say I wish the church did more, at least with more like, in your face type of stuff. Because like the doctrine's really clear, like, get married in the temple. That's how you get exaltation. That's makes sense, right? To get the highest degree of glory of the celestial kingdom, you have to get married. Totally makes sense, and I get it. But I think I wish that President Nelson or some member of the presidency or just anyone really would just do a whole talk all about all of same-sex attraction and like just kind of hashed out a lot of issues that they can. I don't expect like all of the answers, because that would kind of get rid of faith and suffering and that kind of thing, that kind of concept. But I wish that there was just a little bit more information. So I expect that's going to happen soon. So
okay. So as three faithful Latter-day Saints, what is your feeling when there are all of these attacks against the church in regards to LGBTQ issues? I mean, what is there? Do you feel you have a different perception of that than maybe most Latter-day Saints would that are straight, that don't have same-sex attraction? Or what is that unique for you?
Who wants to go first? I wish they could see my perspective as being someone who has been in that lifestyle and who now is living a gospel, a faithful Latter-day Saint life. I think the church they think the church is denying us from greater happiness and joy by enforcing these archaic biblical beliefs, right? And the brethren should just whip up some revelation and make it easier for us so that we could have our gay marriage, And I wish they could understand that true joy and happiness comes through living God's prescribed plan for marriage and families. I've seen that firsthand in my life. Going from gay relationships where I had a surface level happiness and worldly joy, what the scriptures say, the joy of the wicked, and coming into the gospel where it's been difficult trying to reconcile my sexuality and faith, but I have found more joy in being married to my wife and having children of my own and striving to emulate the role that my heavenly parents have than I ever did with my past boyfriends. As exciting and enjoyable as that was for that period of my life, it still left me feeling empty and without any real meaning. And unfortunately, there's no way to pound that into people's heads. It's kind of just comes from personal experience, but I wish they would acknowledge that more and see that we're not oppressed. We're not discriminated against. We have access to all the same rights, ordinances within the church as any other member. But that also requires doing what Jesus did and crucifying our flesh and submitting our wills to the Father's will. And that's required of all of us across the board, whether you're gay or straight. So, okay, I'll get off my soapbox now.
Okay. Skylar, what can you add to that?
Yeah, I would just echo Timber, and I try to I mean I've experienced a good amount of I guess critiques from strangers for my life, just because of I back kind of what thrust me into the limelight was I had this tweet that someone screenshotted and went pretty big. And so from that, I have a big sample size of how people respond to my choice of marriage. And I try to take people where they are and try to understand their perspective in insofar as giving them a little bit of grace, because I think without the context of the gospel, it would make sense for, like, of course a gay man would pursue a relationship with another man. Like, of course that would make sense. But because I have the perspective of the gospel, it, like, my whole paradigm is shifted, and I'm able to see more clearly than somebody who just happens upon me on Twitter why I would make this choice and what joy the gospel does bring me. So I try to lend a little bit of grace to people who may come lobbing attacks, and I kind of have a rule where I'll initially respond gracefully but firmly and try to have some sort of conversation. If they double down, I either leave it or I say something snarky and then regret it later. But I try to follow that pattern, and yeah, I mean, understand that people have different perspectives. That doesn't mean it's right. Doesn't mean they're justified in lobbing attacks at me or the church. But contextualizing those things, I think, is helpful to being more productive with our conversations.
Okay. So Timber and Skylar, you guys are married both with kids, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And Josh, you, I believe, are planning on that same path. Is that correct?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely.
Okay. So from your perspective right now, I mean, how do you tell me about how that, I mean, what is the opposition there? Mm-hmm. And what is the carrot? What drives you toward that?
Right. For sure. I think when I started doing the Be Unique videos, there was, especially on TikTok, a bunch of LGBTQ activists. I got a hold of them. Our account actually got banned like after the first video because people were just saying it's so offensive and bad. But then I, appealed the ban and we're still up. But essentially, like, we just got like a bunch of attacks, and a lot of people were saying that I was between like a glass mirror between my sexuality, like it was going to break at some point, right? And I'm going to be gay. That's what they thought, because I just would always use same-sex attraction. I never used gay because I don't, experience as much as other people do. Like, it's not like a huge thing in my life as others are. But I do hear a lot from those people on TikTok. I get DMs, I got Instagram comments, and pretty much anywhere that they can find me. They're always wondering why I'm not dating a guy, why, I'm not going to be happy unless I date a guy. I'll never be my true self, my authentic self, if I don't date a guy, and that type of thing. And so what I've learned is that, I think it really just goes down to my testimony. That's what drives me to just ignore all of them completely and just know that that's what I want, is to get married in the temple to a woman and have kids and be exalted and, just pursue everything that the gospel has to offer. Because I've learned that Jesus Christ is the only path to joy, to true joy, and to true discipleship and eternal life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. That's just how it is. All of the religions of earth will have to learn that at some point, that Christ is the only way. And so that, I think, is my main drive, is hope in Jesus Christ. And, and wanting to be like him someday and just following his commandments. I think if I didn't have Christ in my life, it might be a lot harder. And so whenever I see those people, I just try and have a little bit of grace for them, but I'm also very snarky too, and I can get back at them. And but I've learned the most helpful thing is to try and talk to them, but again, be firm, because I think if you're not, and if you're wishy-washy, that like allows a lot of things to come in. But that's just my way of trying to help them a little bit. But yeah, I think that's just definitely what I want, is to get married in the temple and have kids and teach them the gospel.
So here's again, this is just my observation. I think most people would say the same thing, though.
Yeah.
Is for all three of you then, all right, two of you already married and one looking to get married in the temple. Inside of the church, there seem to be a lot of very loud voices that would be the ones that you might, Josh, need to be snarky with a little bit, right? In other words, there are a lot of loud voices inside of the church. I'm talking about members, influencers, people online, etc., that would say that exact thing. You need to be your authentic self, and that's okay, and you need to pursue your own truth, your own identity, right? What I don't understand, and one of the reasons I'm doing this in this episode, is why is there not a bigger voice among members of the church? Look, I mean, I believe in agency. You choose what you want to do. That's your choice. That's what you want to do. But gospel principles, we know the plan of salvation.
Right.
And why are there so many voices inside of the church that would say to the three of you, I'm sorry for what you're going through, and maybe you ought to look at something more authentic?
That is
go first on
the question. Yeah, who do you want to go first?
Skylar, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I'm champing at the bit here a little bit. That earlier I said that I lend grace and I try to understand where people are coming from, and that is true, even with members of the church. But I guess my frustration is a little bit amplified when we're dealing with fellow members of the church who have the context of the gospel but are still advocating for things that are contrary to the gospel. I just can't square in my mind having an understanding that God loves us, that this is Christ's church, and by making and keeping covenants, that is what brings us the most joy. Having that context, and then I guess convincing yourself that, what, maybe we do know better, or maybe we should speculate about what will come down the pike. And I can understand I think there are different motivations for doing so. Sometimes it's just political and people let their politics dictate their religion rather than the other way around. But sometimes it is, I think, compassion driven, wanting to ease burdens. But the problem is you're easing temporary burdens at the expense of eternal progression. And I think, there are a lot of different reasons why someone might do that. Someone might be genuinely convinced that's the right thing. But I guess I struggle to understand how someone could claim to believe the precepts of the gospel while also not even just like, there's a difference between allowing or respecting people's choices, but then also championing them. Those are two different things. So I can't understand how you can have the context of the gospel while championing, that's a hard word, things that enable faith crises or push people off the path. I can't square that in my head, and
that's an interesting point. Difficult. Enabling faith crisis. I'm going to get back to that in a bit. Timber, but why? Why are those voices so loud? Why,
okay.
I understand the response, but why inside of the church are those voices so loud?
Well, so there's a couple things. Well, first of all, I think we have to contextualize this, that we're speaking from a English speaking European Western perspective here. And that's mainly, those are the main members who really are the loudest on this issue. So you go to Africa, totally different story.
Yes.
Totally different story. And but why? Because it's popular. Let's look at the ancient Christian church, okay? We all know that they adopted Greek heresies and adopted them to be Christian dogma. And the same thing's happening today, okay? Whether we like it or not, we're heavily influenced by pop culture of today. And unfortunately, there's a lot of philosophy of men that's mingled with scripture that's really convincing. And it also ties in with our doctrine. You know, some members of the church feel, well, it's the ongoing restoration. There's things that are still going to be revealed. And, you know, this could be one of them. And hey, look at blacks in the priesthood. That was that was a wrong policy for over 100 years. And so why isn't the church, can't the church be wrong on this issue too? And it also comes down to an misunderstanding of what the scripture actually teaches. Because some people think, oh, Leviticus and Paul's writings are referring to only pedophiles or ritualistic homosexual sex and not actual like loving consensual relationships, which is totally not true. I read a whole blog post about it, and there's other great resources on that. And I think it just comes from a lot of misunderstandings about the doctrine.
Well, it almost seems like there's a movement that's there's you talk about a philosophy. That philosophy in action almost seems like a movement. Well, it is a movement, isn't it?
Oh yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And so members of the church being caught up into that movement that may distort, as Skylar was saying, the idea of how do you square this with gospel principles? How do you square this with the plan of salvation?
If I can just pipe in here again, I think a lot of it has to do with people. We're naturally religious people, whether or not we engage with traditional religion, we will find something to fulfill that role in our lives, whether it's politics, whether it's money, whatever it is, we will worship something or we will give our devotion to something. So as members of the church, I think maybe sometimes deviate from some of the purposes or some of the beliefs of the gospel. A lot of the structure and fulfillment that comes from living the gospel starts to crumble. And so they're going to, if not try to build that back up, they're going to look for other places to fulfill that role. And I think politics does a good job of imitating that fulfillment, or at least giving a surface level quenching of that thirst.
Yeah, some purpose and meaning and yeah. Josh, part of those voices in the church are other gay members of the church. Yeah. And there are some that are more prominent than others that are very influential. They go around giving firesides, and part of what they've said, though, has to do with, okay, well, if it's almost like a pass to those that decide that they want to get married to a same-sex partner. And there is oftentimes on their social media the idea of, well, let's hope for the change, or we can just hold off on the change. And I've even heard them say, well, the proclamation of the family isn't what you think it is. It has nothing to do with same-sex attraction. So what is your response to that?
Yeah, so I actually pay attention to them more than I wish I would. I actually made a video recently where I was like, yeah, if you ever look at their books, the only use for them is to hold up a table that isn't steady. So I'm not happy with them at all. So essentially what I was doing with them, so I think we have to be honest. The two people in Utah especially. So you got Charlie Bird and Ben Schilaty.
Mhm.
Charlie Bird was Cosmo at BYU, so it's super popular. He has like 34,000 followers or something like that. Crazy amount of people for just being a mascot. And most of the time he was under a mask, right? So it's insane that he has the amount of followers he has. But essentially what he does is he is probably the main person that causes a lot of confusion for people my age that are coming up into the church. And I think that's where it starts from, is with this new generation of members. And so what Charlie Bird does is he kind of walks this path of like, oh, I'm like super good covenant keeping member of the church. And then you look at his social media and you see he's dating a guy named Ryan, and he's public about it all over. And they constantly make videos about each other being like gay and how they're so happy together and that type of thing. And he does like a thing every Sunday where he talks about like being a gay Latter-day Saint and giving different perspectives. And he just wrote another book. And Sky and I had problems with some of the quotes that we saw from it. And it's just interesting to see. And I think where it even gets worse is where you see that Ben Schilaty's and Charlie Bird's books are being held at Desert Book.
Yeah.
It's like, so what happens is these people that hear about LGBTQ issues, or their son comes out as gay, or their daughter comes out as lesbian, or whatever it is, or trans, I guess that's a little bit out there, but they also talk about that sometimes. But what I would say is they go to Desert Book and they're expecting to find, some sort of book that will give them guidance to help their son or daughter, right? Totally like innocent, awesome, great, trying to be good parent or brother, sister, whatever it is. But what happens is they read that book and, I read part of, with Beneath the Mask, which is, or Without the Mask, which is the first book Charlie Bird wrote. And essentially inside of that, in the first couple of pages, he says, God created me this way. He was in the celestial room and he just had this thought and he's like, yeah, like I had this thought that God basically told me, why are you asking me this again and again and again and again? He's like, I created you this way. But I would honestly say, first of all, like that's just wishful thinking, as Russell Nelson says. He actually said that in his last talk, and that stood out to me. And I was like, oh, that kind of makes an explanation for that line of thinking. And maybe there is a debate of maybe like God did create you with this struggle mortally, right? But Lance B. Wickman said essentially like this is not something that you will experience. It did not exist in the pre-mortal existence and it will not exist in the next life. It's just as a mortal thing. So he did a great interview with Elder Oaks that you can read. It was a couple of years ago, but it's awesome. I think it was like 2006, but I always tell people doctrine doesn't change. So
the thing is, let me interject here. The thing is, these are the guys that get the most support.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, these are the main voices. In fact, I've seen them on, let's call it mainstream Latter-day Saint media.
Right.
They're on all the mainstream Latter-day Saint media stuff being held up. And you've got stake presidents and probably area authorities that are bringing them in. And look, I've watched Ben Schilaty's Fireside once, and it was totally fine. There was no problem with it. The problem is just a couple of things that are said, and then the books, and then the social media, and you're young. These are all firesides, mostly youth. They go in, they start following them on social media, and it's like, wait a minute here.
Right.
This is not all gospel centered.
Right. I gotta jump in here because I've been to one of his firesides. He did one out here in Idaho Falls, and let me just say this about Ben: he's a very amiable guy. Mm-hmm. By all accounts, he's a great guy. I've talked to him, but like you said, the problem is the fireside he did was actually really good, and I felt the spirit. He said something that was a little edgy that I didn't like, but the problem is then they go to Questions from the Closet podcast, and I spent hours listening to all of that because I know personally members, guys, part of my ministry and friends of mine who have decided to leave the church and break covenants because of things Ben and Charlie have said.
Mm-hmm.
And listening to that, they say things like, you can receive a revelation and God can give you revelation to leave the church and same-sex marry. Or the family proclamation doesn't say anything about gay marriage.
Yeah, I've seen them say that.
And so it could come in there somewhere, some amendment's going to be added. And oftentimes it's what they don't say and what they just allude to. That's the issue. And it just leaves this big open, well, maybe my gay dating isn't excluded from the plan, or maybe that isn't breaking the law of chastity. And so anyway, I think more than not, it's what's not said that's more destructive.
Yeah, and again, I think it's, and I have the same. I saw a fireside of Enchilada, and I thought it was great. I felt the spirit; it was good. Mm-hmm. He's very good at speaking. Did a great job. But there's just a couple things again where it's like he opens this door up for same-sex relationship as if it's part of the plan, and then obviously everyone follows him, and then you go into a social media and it's like, wait a minute here, you didn't say these things in the fireside.
yeah. And so that's the thing, is why Deseret Book continues to keep their books on the shelves. Are these people not actually vetting what they're saying on their podcast? Because honestly, they should be pulled.
Trust me, I've had my issues with Deseret Book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I know other people who are more conservative members of the church. Sky and I know one who tried to get their book published through Deseret Book, and they rejected it because it was a more faithful book on this issue.
Yeah. Well, and everything
whoever's
was going on with John Gee and what he had written, and the being pulled out, pulled from the shelf for a while. And what happens there, honestly, I think a lot of what happens there is just the loud voices that call Deseret Book. And, I'm a loud voice to some degree, but it's on the opposite end. And you have all of these loud voices out there that are saying, hey, pull this, or why isn't this in there? And they get hammered with that. And I think they acquiesce oftentimes.
Yeah. So, I will say that I guess it heard down the pike that there are some efforts to have a productive dialogue with members in the Deseret Book Board to have more options of, if nothing else, have more options of more faithful members of the church who are same-sex attracted or identify with something in LGBTQ, to at least give more options. And I'll also say that with Ben, like Timber, I've had interactions with him. I went to lunch with him, and same, general take on, I think he's a good man. I think he has a genuine heart. And I think there's a difference between judging individuals and judging morality. And I think we need to make that distinct clarification, or that distinction, because a lot of times when we talk about these things, they kind of get lumped together. So
no, I agree 100% with that. Yeah, absolutely. So for Sky and for Timber, what would your response be? You're both married in the temple, correct?
Yes.
Okay. You've each been married in the temple. You have kids. You have a family. And for someone to come along and say, well, you should be living your authentic life. I can't put myself in your shoes, but I am married and I do have 4 kids. And I feel like you're anything that would say, hey, you're a man, you want other women or something. Why aren't you going after this? And it's like, I have a family. I'm a father. I am a husband, right? What would you miss out on if you went to be your, air quotes here, authentic self? Or what is your response to somebody who would say that to you?
I would say, I mean, I think there was a time in my life when when those voices would have been a lot more difficult to ignore. I think that's a big reason why I do the outreach that I do, and I wrote my book and I do the podcast, is because I picture myself 10 years ago when I was kind of struggling to reconcile faith and sexuality and make plans for my future. I picture that version of Skylar and see him coming across influences today inside and outside of the church, and just being so fearful for that little Skylar because of how much more difficult it is now. I grew up with, I got a Facebook on a desktop when I was maybe 15 or something. I didn't grow up with social media like kids are today. And I just think that would be so much more difficult and so much more confusing. So from my perspective now, because I am in such a place that I've had to work for, my wife and I have had to work for, we've had our struggles, some unique to our situation, some just normal marriage things. But we've worked through them and we've come to a really good place. And so now from this vantage of where I am now, those voices have absolutely no effect on me. I just kind of laugh it off. And my goal, I guess, is to kind of help members of the church who are a sexual minority or whatever you want to call it, get to a spot where they feel confident in themselves, in their faith, and their place in the church, so that when those voices come, we can just laugh it off.
Timber?
So I guess the question comes down to what is authenticity? And, when I was living my gay lifestyle, I probably would have said, yeah, I was living my most authentic self. But being in the church now, well, let me backtrack. Back then, like I alluded to earlier, is I knew something was missing at the end of the day. Yeah, I loved my boyfriends. It was exciting. It was thrilling to be with them. I felt all the butterflies and infatuation and stuff that people expect in a romantic relationship. And I think that's part of the issue. Is in Western culture, we view things heavily through a romantic perspective. And I mean the philosophy that started in the 1700s. And we expect a relationship to look in a romantic way. And when it doesn't fit that ideal that we think it should be, then it's not authentic. And in my personal view, I think romanticism, it has obscured what true love is. And we see things through a eros and ludus love perspective. If you're not familiar with the Greek words for love, go look it up. And a lot of times we neglect the agape and pragma side of things, as it should be. And there's absolutely nothing wrong if a relationship starts with infatuation and you feel that eros, you feel that ludus. But really, the higher love we should be focusing on in a relationship and in a marriage is agape, and then it transitions into pragma, which is like a more seasoned, devoted love. And agape is the Greek word that's often used for translated as charity in the King James Version.
That's funny. This is like the third time in the past few days that the different versions of love in the Greek language have come up in my life. But I think it is an important thing to remember. Like, we have just this one word that means love, this one word love that just means so many different kinds of things. And so a lot of times people will say gay people should be able to love who they want. And there's just like so much to dissect in just that sentence. I think a lot of it gets lost. Sorry to cut you off, Timber. You can.
Yeah. So in connection with that, I think, so what is real authentic relationship? I think that's real authenticity comes as we emulate our Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother and their role and strive to have their love in our relationship. And whether both spouses are totally heterosexual or one has same-sex attraction, it doesn't matter. We all have to sacrifice something to be authentic to our eternal identity. Because the fact of the matter is all of us have sexual desires that are out of line with God's mandated order.
Yes.
Whether you're heterosexual or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, anyway, I could keep going. I could keep ranting on that.
Appreciate it. No, that's good. That's good. Okay, on to one other point here, Josh. The pride flag. What are your thoughts about the pride flag?
I hate it. Simply. You can put it on a t-shirt. Yeah, Josh.
Well, how do you really feel about
it? So I think I have this running theory, and it's probably wrong. I've only told a couple of people about it, but essentially the pride flag, I see it as a perversion of Noah's promise, or God's promise to Noah, right? That whenever you see the rainbow, then you'll know that I'm not going to flood the earth again, right? As long as you're worthy. Mm-hmm. So when I look back on just how the devil operates, the devil works in ways where he cannot create things. He only can use things that are created, including people, right? Especially people. So what he does is I think he took that beautiful promise of renewal and, like, I'm going to let you live and giving you a second chance. He killed everyone except for Noah's family and animals. So essentially, I think that's what he's done is he's taken the rainbow and just perverted it and twisted it like he does with pretty much everything and made a whole movement against it. And I think the bigger thing that's even crazier than that is what happens is it keeps people away from getting married in the temple. So people see pride flag and they know that means LGBTQ in some way. And so what happens is they see that and they're like, okay, I'm going to get married to a guy and, it's okay. I'm a part of this movement, right? This community of people who needs the church, right? I can feel my most authentic self and I have people that can back me up. So that's the danger of it is it's created this whole overarching thing. And it's kind of terrifying because if you go anywhere in the world now, like even Africa in some parts, you might find, some gay people that have pride flags. Like it's a internationally recognized symbol that has corrupted governments, has, caused protests, has caused, protests at BYU. It's this dangerous and evil thing that just keeps people away from eternity, because that's what the devil really, really wants, is to keep people away from inheriting the kingdom of God. That's if he can do anything at all, that's what he wants. And that's the best way he can do it is by distracting you, getting you in a gay relationship, spending your life in a gay relationship, dying, and so it's still possible after death to get married, but I would feel it'd be harder. But I don't know. So yeah, I think the pride flag is just this big symbol that has a lot of motive behind it. I've even thought sometimes that it could be the mark of the beast or like something similar to that magnitude, because it's just huge. It takes down everything, and I think it's the devil's biggest front right now, and I don't see it going away. Honestly, I think that's going to go up all the way up until Jesus comes down from heaven is when that finally will go away. But again, it might not, because those people that have those attractions are in gay relationships. It's not like they're going to just change all of a sudden, transfigure into some holy, amazing being, right? They're going to still have those attractions. They'll probably still want to be with that person. So, okay. But yeah, it's dangerous. I would even think it's close to the mark of the beast, just because of how big it's been and how many people and faith it's destroyed.
Yeah. Sky, what do you think about the pride flag?
Well, I don't know if it's the mark of the beast, I'll say. I tend to maybe think not, but
yeah, probably not.
I do think it's a fairly loaded symbol. I think some people use it to members of the church, particularly. Some people use it to try to show their love for people who are in the LGBTQ community, and that is advertised as the best way to do so, to have pride and to celebrate using this symbolism. I do think it has become more of a political symbol than anything else, and you can choose to use it in a pure way, but you can't choose how especially the most vulnerable people will interpret your support for it. So I mean, we just don't have that control, and because it is such a loaded symbol, the loudest people in the movement tend to set the trajectory for where it goes, and the loudest ones are usually the most radical. So all that to say, I think it is a loaded symbol. I think it's, more political at its core. In a lot of ways is very anti-religious and represents things contrary to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I personally choose not to use it or associate with it, and wish other members of the church would do the same, because I do think it does more harm than good.
Member, I feel like, well, and I've seen this online, in fact, that some members of the church would love to see the temple, with the full spectrum of lights of the rainbow on the temple walls, set outside, lit up, kind of like the Y has been at times at BYU. What are your thoughts on the pride flag?
Well, what are you having pride in? What is it you're showing pride for? The thing is the pride flag came about after the Stonewall riots, and it's meant to be a celebration of gay relationships. That's what it's for. And now that they've added the T to the alphabet soup acronym, now it's also a celebration of gender transitioning, because those are core identities according to that symbol. So what the pride flag is it's pride in either a sexual attraction that only leads out of God's plan, or to transitioning your gender again, which also leads us away from God's plan. So why want to use this symbol other than to celebrate life choices that directly contradict the doctrine of the church and Christianity generally? So I wish every ally there could understand what that symbol really represents. And as someone who's been to real pride parades in the past, you can see how heavily hypersexualized the community is. And then, no, that's not everyone, but there's a reason we use that symbol, and it's to celebrate gay sex and gender transitioning. So is that something you want to promote in the church?
Is the pride flag anti-family?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's pro, I don't like to say Marxist, but Marx was one of the proponents of having no nuclear family, right? And the community is the family, and that family is whatever you make it.
Sexual liberation.
Yeah, and I'm not going to say the pride flag is Marxist. I don't think it is, but it promotes ideas that correlate with that, and yeah. So I think it's definitely anti-traditional family for sure.
Okay. Josh, last couple of years, and I pointed this out in a few episodes, President Nelson has come out with what I call the President Nelson's identity hierarchy.
Yeah.
Where he's got child of God on top, he's got then child of the covenant, and then disciple of Christ. In my mind, what he's doing, especially because he came out with this, I think the first time at a youth fireside, a YSA fireside, maybe, he's trying to say, look, there seems to be, through these ideas, these ideologies, and through our culture right now, this pulling people away from a core identity or these core identities in the church by giving them a new identity, by replacing these things. Or let's say in a hierarchical structure, you're taking your sexuality or your gender or your nationality or your race, whatever it is, and lifting it up above those other three identities that President Nelson goes over, right? Do you see, as I do, a problem with elevating all of these stripes of the flag, so to speak, all of these different identities above these identities that President Nelson went over?
100%. I think that's really where it gets people. And so if you look at the church's website, it used to be called a Mormon Gay. Now it's just like same-sex attraction.lds.org, something like that, or churchofjesuschrist.org. Essentially on that website, they have a section underneath, can I use labels? And like first off says no, we would not recommend it, or something to that effect. Because essentially what you do is you start to personify that label. So it says, like, if you experience same-sex attraction, to use that, right? Use same-sex attraction, because at that point, all you see with that is it's just like something I experience. It's just an attraction. It's not something I can embody. Maybe it's like a little bit intrinsic to who I am. It does affect me in a lot of ways, right? But it doesn't, isn't something that I can like put myself in. Like, it's not like a box as far as like gay is. So I think what President Nelson was saying is he was just subtly doing that, where he's just putting that out there. Like, it wasn't a general conference. It wasn't anything like at a major press release or anything. He just did it on an Instagram post as well. It went pretty viral, as most of his posts do. And I think what he was just trying to do is just warn people that you do not want to personify these identities. You don't want to use these labels if you can. I understand why some people might, and that's the people that I know that do use it are actually like really strong in the church. Sky and Preston and other people are, married in temple, right? So I don't have to really worry about them using that. But other people that are single and are looking for relationships and looking for, that thing in their life, if they use gay or bisexual, you're going to start embodying that, and it's going to become intrinsic to who you are, whether you like it or not. Because what's tied to that is the community, and people are like, oh, he's gay, so we're going to go to a pride parade, or we're going to go to a gay bar or whatever, right? And you'll start being tempted to do those things because you'll start seeing that community, and all these people love me and they accept me. They want to be, my friends, and they want to be with me, and whatever it is. And so it just is a dangerous road to do anything and to put anything above child of God, because when you start to do that with anything, doesn't matter if it's LGBTQ, doesn't matter if it's race, I'm Black, so I can't, a lot of people, they look back at Blacks in the priesthood and they think that just disqualifies them from the priesthood for some reason, because that was a thing and they think it might come back or whatever. And I think that's where the danger goes, is when you just put anything above child of God, because that's the core thing that you have to understand and to internalize, to really want to become like God and become like Jesus Christ, and to understand where you're from. That's why we put so much stress on missionaries to emphasize the family, because without the family proclamation, without eternity, without the plan of salvation, there's nothing really. There's no purpose, there's no drive. So I think you have to make sure that you are internalizing child of God, because that will give you purpose, and that will give you a cup that filleth, as Jesus likes to say a lot. All the world and man will give you a cup, but it will never be filled. But what's amazing about Christ, and I would even say a little bit more, is that he will fill your cup, will overflow it, with joy and happiness and peace, and in a way you can never have. So that only comes from internalizing child of God. So you have to make sure that's on top, for sure.
Great. Sky.
Yeah, can I speak to that? Yeah, so as Josh mentioned, I do use the label gay in my life. I use it synonymously with same-sex attracted. The reason that there are a few reasons why I've adopted that label. I think one of them is it allowed me to see it as less of a boogeyman in my life. Same-sex attraction felt more significant to me than the label gay. And I say that fully realizing how much baggage there is in the term, and oftentimes I feel like I have to give a million caveats to my use of the term.
Mm-hmm.
But another part of it is I kind of resent the world's version of what gay means and what it should mean and what it can only mean. And so
what is the world version?
yeah, so part of me is like taking that worldly version, which is somebody who experiences same-sex attraction and who is also pursuing a same-sex relationship. They lump those two together.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm kind of saying like I'm going to adopt this label, but then try and break open that box a little bit and show people maybe who are less familiar with the church that being quote unquote gay doesn't have to mean that you pursue that lifestyle. And I really like how Preston, he was my co-host on the podcast and a good friend. He always talked about that label as something that is orbital in his life. There are the core identities like the three that you listed. Those are the core to my identity. Then there are things that are part of me, but more orbital. Like they affect me, but not quite to my core. And gay is one of those. Same-sex attracted is one of those. So those are kind of some of my reasons, but I do see much more value, much more fulfillment in my role as a husband, as a father, as a brother, as a cousin, whatever it may be. Like all of those roles in my life come miles ahead of a descriptor like gay that I
And those
use.
are all identities too.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And I see gay as more of a descriptor of an experience rather than part of like a core part of who I am.
Okay. Timber, what about you? And you're a convert. You were living the gay lifestyle. You've come to a point where you've gotten married in the temple, you have kids. How important is keeping those identities straight, keeping these other labels below, and keeping this idea of the covenant path and being a child of God and a child of the covenant up top?
I mean, that's my whole vision and perspective is when I joined the church, I tried to cut myself off from everything in my past. And I think I went to the opposite extreme to where I just tried to bury it even from myself, which was a failure. And I don't think we necessarily need to do that. I think we need to address this part of us and recognize it for what it is, and learn to accept it, but not act on it, right? And I don't think there's anything wrong with addressing it and talking about it. Just like, for instance, I talk about my depression. It's a thing that's a part of my experience, but my depression isn't me, and I'm not depression, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, my eternal identity is so much. How do I say this? That's my whole focus in life, or at least I try to make it. If I'm not so distracted by all my other duties, but that's my motivation for everything that I do. I know that I'm a literal spirit child of heavenly parents, and I have the potential to become like them. And what else matters? Nothing else matters. Like, and but I think that's that's the danger with accepting a label and making it such an overarching part of your identity, like your sexual orientation, is that you begin to think that that is an immutable characteristic, and that even an eternal part of your identity, and which is so dangerous because it totally distracts from uh, how God ordained things from the beginning, right? There's Adam and Eve, who were created in the image of Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother, and we're supposed to follow in their footsteps, see ourselves as Adam and Eve, right? And by accepting a same-sex identity, we're totally negating that entire plan. And so I think that's all there is to it.
Last question here that I'll put out to all of you. What, if you were speaking to a currently single or non-married or non-married in the temple Latter-day Saint who experiences same-sex attraction, a gay Latter-day Saint, what, especially a young gay Latter-day Saint, what would your advice be to them?
I can start that off if you'd like.
Sure.
Not to get too self-promoting here, but the purpose of my book was to answer that exact question. And the title, as I mentioned, Exclude Not Thyself. There's a lot of weight to that title and a lot of reasoning. If I were to go back and give my younger self a piece of advice, it would be something to that effect. Don't exclude yourself in any aspect of life. And whatever our life situation, I think that is the most common tactic that the adversary will throw at us, is to convince us that for whatever reason, whatever experience we have or trial that we face, we're the exception to the rule. And whether that is in a way to boost our pride and tell us that we're better, or whether it is to discourage us and tell us that, everyone else can live the gospel and can pursue temple covenants, but because of fill in the blank, you are not able to do so. And it just so happens that in our culture, issues of sexuality and gender expression and gender dysphoria and things like that, for whatever reason, are the primary cultural battlegrounds that we're on right now. And so a lot of things in life we see through that lens. And so tying that understanding to somebody trying to live the gospel, especially a young, impressionable person, having that concept in their mind is so damaging to their eternal progression. So that would be my main piece of advice, is just don't listen to that idea that you're the exception, no matter what your life experience is, and hold fast to what you do know about Christ and his gospel, and hold out for the things that you don't know, and don't speculate, don't live your life based on what might happen or what revelation might come down from on high, and hold fast to what you do know and pursue that full force, whatever that looks like for you.
Josh, what advice would you give?
I think what I would say is, I think first of all, I would tell them to be okay, because I think what happens is they kind of go into this crisis mode automatically, where they're like, oh my gosh, I'm gay, and like I don't know what to do with these feelings, and like all of this rush of emotions comes over them. I'd be like, it's fine, relax, it's okay. And I think I'd say after that, I think what I would do is I'd first listen to them and see like what exactly they're feeling and what exactly they think about it, like where they stand in the church, how their testimony is, and that type of thing, and just try and get a background for them personally, because I can give them a bunch of like generic advice and it might help, or I can give them something specific that will help that specific person. So I think that's what I would do is talk to them. But when it comes to more like generic advice, I would say the most generic thing of all for all of us is to go to Jesus Christ. There's no other way for us to find peace and joy and love than Jesus Christ, because he is all of those things and so many other things personified. He is those things, right? So I think I would tell them to work on their testimony, read the scriptures, pray for sure. I think the more time that you spend talking to God, and sometimes you'll end up weeping and, going through hard times through prayer. But I think that is when your guardian angels, I guess, and having Christ there and God listening to you as your heavenly parent, that created you and loves you. I think that's the best thing for you, is to talk to him on a regular basis. And I think also I would say avoid the media at all costs, avoid the community, especially. I would say if you are going to, if you're going to listen to any books or listen to any people that experience this type of thing, like I've recommended this to pretty much everyone that I go to that has asked me questions about this, like how do I help my daughter? How do I help my son? How do I help myself? Right. What I always say is, first of all, like always go to Jesus Christ and all those things I said before. But secondly, I would say definitely go and read Sky or Preston's books. Like those are amazing. So Preston's is called This Boy and His Mother. It's a beautiful book. Like just the title is beautiful. It's an amazing title. I don't know who did it, but it's amazing. It has his mother holding him up and Jesus reaching down to carry him up. And so I think that's how it is for most of those people, is the parents want to support them. But I think the best way to do it is to not read Charlie Bird's or Ben Shelley's books, because I've seen too many people get their faith destroyed from those. I would instead recommend definitely Sky and Preston's. Sky's book should be out soon. I don't remember when, but
in June. And
June.
you read that promo perfectly. Your check is in the mail.
Yeah, thanks.
Timber, you do a lot of this in your ministries. What do you say to young Latter-day Saints, for example, that experience same-sex attraction, that say, hey, I'm gay. How do I reconcile all this? What do you tell them?
Well, I tell them this a lot, so if they're listening right now, they're going to be bored. But the biggest thing I try to tell them is, well, let me preface. I think a lot of us have this fear that staying in the church is going to mean we're going to be sad, lonely, and a life with lacking intimacy if we decide to stay on the covenant path. And that is just false. That's a lie from Satan. And I know that whether you remain single or choose to marry a woman, you can have a joyful, intimate life as a covenant-keeping Latter-day Saint. And that's not to say that our life is going to be devoid of challenges. I still have challenges. I still have struggles. The first few years of Tiffany and my marriage was pretty hard. There were some serious things we had to work out. But true, lasting joy comes from surrendering our will to Jesus Christ. And it's the harder right to choose. And sometimes it's painful at times walking that road, but the joy is sustainable. It's not fleeting like the joy of the world. And that's what I try to remind them of, is the grass often looks a lot greener on the other side, but that grass is astroturf. It's laden with pesticides. It's pernicious in the way that it will slowly kill you, your spirit. And yeah, that's the main thing I try to help them to see, that there's greater joy and fulfillment in the gospel. And there are ways that we can express our same-sex attraction within the bounds the Lord has set, that are healthy, that are righteous. And let me qualify that by saying there are different types of same-sex attraction, right? We can be attracted spiritually, emotionally, not platonically to other men. And enriching those things is beautiful. And just like with Jonathan and David and Jesus and John, who John was laying on Jesus's chest at the Last Supper, that's a beautiful display of intimacy that we unfortunately don't have in American culture anymore. But those are things that we can foster in our lives to where we can have fulfilling relationships and intimacy and joy from following Christ. So yeah, that's what a lot of our meetings consist of, is talking about those things.
Right. Well, I appreciate all three of you guys coming on here and being each alternative voices. I wish they weren't just alternative. Your voices are the alternative voices out there right now. And I think we need to change that. I think we need to have more of your voices out there for guidance and for options for people that do struggle with these things, for parents and for kids and others that struggle with LGBTQ issues. I really appreciate your testimonies. I really appreciate your hierarchy of values, and all three of you are so centered on Jesus Christ. I really appreciate that. Thank you to all of you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.